Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Akil Khalfani. I'm the director of the Africana Institute here at Essex County College. Hello, everyone. This is the first day of African History Month here that we're celebrating. We're beginning our program, and so today we're doing our annual flag raising ceremony. So in the flag raising ceremony, we're going to hoist the flag up top. But for the time being, we're here just having some discussion. We want to provide an opportunity for people. We have people passing out our bookmarks. We have a new bookmark that we have that came out. We have a whole program of African History Month events. So the flyers are being printed right now, but I'm going to run down the list now and I'll do it again later. So today is the flag raising. Tomorrow we have the Frederick Douglass documentary that's going to be shown. Also, it's a passport event where we're helping students to travel abroad. So we have students in Brazil right now. We're trying to send students to London and to China this summer. So we're going to have an opportunity for students to get free passports. So we encourage you to, if you're not a student, we encourage you to encourage your students to come to the session tomorrow at 1 o'clock. We're going to show Booker T. Washington, a documentary on Booker T. Washington's legacy of his life. That's going to be on the 14th. And then the week of the 19th, which is the 19th, the 20th, and the 21st, we're going to have African Marketplace, and we're going to have our annual Garvey and Nkrumah lecture series. So I encourage you to come out for those things. And then last but not least for the month, we're going to have a program called SURGE, the Power of Women in Politics Today. And we have a whole list of people who are working on Professor Bridgeforth. We have someone from different parts of politics, someone from the Board of Ed in West Orange. We have some other folks that we're bringing on board. So I encourage you to come and participate in all these events so that you can learn more about why and how women in politics, what's going on. There's a big push right now. It's not a women history event, it's women history, I argue, just like African history every day of the year. So therefore, we're going to want to celebrate in that context. But right now, the first thing we do before we begin most of our ceremonies is that we pour libations. So I'm going to pour libations and get started with what we're going to do today. So we pour libations for those who died, those who went through Middle Passage, those who came before us. And so the way we do that is we pour libations, we ask you all to say Ashe, okay? So that as we pour water here today, we use water because water is the cycle of life. The water comes from that very beginnings, that everything is water, that our bodies are mostly water, the earth we live on is mostly water, and so therefore we want to make sure that we show that connection. And so water here represents that fluid, that circle of life. And we pour out libations for those, we say from the three elements of time. So those from the past, we say Ashe. Those from the present, Ashe. And for those yet to come. And we do it that way because there really is but one time, right? That time is ephemeral. That really, when you think about it, that your DNA, aspects of your human physical being were at the beginnings of time, right? At the beginnings of the beginnings of the beginnings, that you were there. That an element of you physically was there. And that those folks who were at the beginning in their living lives, that an element of them is with you. And that an element of those yet to come is here at the present. So that's why we do it in that way. And then we talk about those who come from the four directions. From the north, Ashe, the south, the east, and the west. Now as we think about those who we're paying tribute to, we want to make sure that we call the names up. So we call their names of those who came before us, those names like Malcolm X, Ashe, Fannie Lou Hamer, Sojourner Truth, and come on, y'all can help me out with some names. Anybody name? Ashe, Ashe, anybody else? Ashe, Ashe, Rosa Parks, Ashe. And so all these names of these folks are the people who we want to pay tribute to. We thank them for their contributions and their sacrifices. And so those of us we think about today, this month is based on works of Carter G. Woodson. So we're going to talk a little bit more about Carter G. Woodson in a moment. But so for Carter G. Woodson, we also say Ashe. also call the names of our family ancestors. So I ask you to call the names of some of your family ancestors. Bring their energy and spirit here with you today. So call them out. I'll say Nancy Frank. Ashe. 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 Anybody else? You have an ancestor you want to call out? So all those names, we call out the names of our ancestors because we want to thank our personal ancestors for making it possible for us to be here today. See, we wouldn't physically, individually, personally be here if it wasn't for those people who made a sacrifice for us to be here. Our mothers and fathers and grandmothers and grandfathers and our great-great-grandmothers and great-great-grandfathers. All of those people, their successes, their trials, their tribulations is what made it possible for us to be here today. If it wasn't for them, then we wouldn't even be here. If they decided just to give up, we wouldn't be here today. So for their contributions and their work, their dedication, their sacrifices, we're thankful. We say Ashe. And for all those whose names we haven't spoken, but we know that they are here, we represent them, and they represent us, we say Ashe. 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 Thank you. Now, as we think about what's going to be happening during the rest of the month, I want to remind you that this is an opportunity for both students, for the community, for families and friends. We have the event. We decided this year to have one event in the evening. Oftentimes, haven't had events in the evenings, and so those things have sometimes been a place where we haven't provided as many services we need to. So we're providing services this evening on the date is the 25th. So that's going to be an evening program. And so then it's important that we try to reach out to folks and show the evenings, students in the evening as well as students in the daytime. And there's different types of programs that we have to make sure that we reflect upon all the different places in which students are and make sure that they all get an opportunity to be exposed to our history and culture. So I want to just take a moment to talk about Carter G. Woodson. Carter G. Woodson, African History Month started by Carter G. Woodson, and really when he started the program, it was called Negro History Week. And Negro History Week was something that he talked about, we have a misunderstanding of. Oftentimes we think that this becomes the shortest week or the shortest month to celebrate African history, right? Or the history of people of African descent. But in reality, what Carter G. Woodson tasked us to do was to look at what we did throughout the year. So he really tasked us with taking the other 11 months, that is March through January, and be engaged actively in showing what's important about African history, about actually practicing things within African history and culture, and then bringing those things to the forefront. And then he wanted us to come back in February and report. So February is actually our report out month. What did you do for the last 11 months? Hopefully you haven't been sitting on your laurels. Hopefully you have been educating yourself and educating others. Hopefully you've taken that time over the last 11 months to be engaged in the trials and tribulations of things going on in our community. Hopefully during the last 11 months you've educated yourself and you've read things that you didn't read before. You've learned things that you didn't know before and that you've shared some of those things. See, Carter G. Woodson was someone who was forward thinking. He was the second person, African American, to graduate from Harvard University. Does anybody know who the first person was? Say it again. W.E.B. Du Bois. So Du Bois was the first, Carter G. Woodson was the second. So that Carter G. Woodson wanted us to be engaged in the process. He wanted us to think outside of the context of the things that we've done. And so one of the books he wrote was The Miseducation of the Negro. And in that book was a powerful book, and there's really some important things in there. What he challenges us to think about is that how are we educating ourselves in these institutions, and what specific skills are we bringing back to our community? Not necessarily that we're just getting educated and getting degrees and getting jobs and making money. No, Woodson wanted us to make sure that we had specific skills that were specific to the folks in our community, that were specific to the needs of our communities. And so if you got a degree in psychology, he wanted us to think about how does that specifically play into the challenges of people of African descent? How does that play into the challenges of African American youth? What specific skills are you learning that's going to help transform the situation in your community? And if you weren't doing those specific things, Woodson would suggest to you that you missed the point, right? He would suggest that the education that you got actually may be miseducated. You may be miseducated, right? And so that you're educated maybe with the wider community, things that the wider community may have needed, right? In that particular time, the book was written in 1933. So maybe you got information on things that were specific to the white or European community, but what specific things that were needed for African Americans that you did or did not get in your educational process? And if you didn't get them, he suggested that we need to go back and be re-educated. We need to go back and think about what we missed in the process. What are the specific challenges that people of African descent experience in their places of work, in their schooling, and in their communities that you specifically are not attending to? And so how do we change what we do so that we're attending to it differently? And I think it's a powerful book. It still resonates today, not just in the United States, but elsewhere in the world. I think it resonates in such a way that if we think about what Woodson was talking about, that we may think about our educational experiences in a different way. We may think about the process of education itself in a different way. And that's what Woodson challenged us to do. And so I think when you're reading and you're studying things, I encourage you to go back and reread Woodson. I encourage you to go back and reread what he was talking about for African History Month. That it is a month about reporting. I want you each to think about next year when we come back, let's all come back and report. Let's actually handle the task at hand that Woodson wanted us to do. That is to make sure that on the other 11 months that we're doing specific things to transform the world for people of African descent. And that once we've done those things, in February we come back and say, this is what we've done, this is what we've done, and we demonstrate that. Have a PowerPoint. Have a movie, have some poetry, have a lecture, something that explains what you've done over the past 11 months. Is everybody with me on that? You understand? Ashe, thank you very much. I appreciate that. So Woodson really encouraged us to think about it differently and to use those different skill sets in different ways. And one of the things I think that's important about what he said is when he was talking about looking at both the medical field, looking at the field of business, he suggested to us that we have particular business either skills or shortcomings that we need to look at differently than other folks do. So for instance, maybe since we're starting businesses and we don't have as much reach in terms of getting the raw materials of what we need or the bulk process things that we need, and so therefore our business expenses may be greater and the cost of doing business in the African American community may be greater. So that if those costs are greater, then how do we relate that information to the consumers so that the consumers understand that it's not that we're trying to get additional money from you, but it's that our costs are higher. And so then therefore we are willing to participate in the commerce in our own community because we recognize that the costs are higher, and that's why the costs for doing business there are higher. And if we do business more so in our communities, then we would have lower costs because it's a reciprocal relationship. And I think those are the kinds of things that Woodson wanted us to analyze and think and understand, and that would change the way we see what we do and change the nature of the business relationships that we have in our community and with our community. I want to take a couple other seconds just to talk about some other things going on here in the city. You know, there's a lot of folks who are talking about that there's gentrification going on in the city. But what I want you to think about is that the mayor suggests to us that we have the ability to be engaged in the process, as opposed to being bystanders to the transformation that's going on in the city of Newark. Be a participant. And what he challenges us for is he says, go out and purchase some property, start a business, learn the process of starting a business. And those things could be things that we come back and report next year. It doesn't matter if you're a faculty member or a staff member. Maybe there's some business that you have, some business idea that you have, that you partner with some other folks and you start doing some things right here. lots of opportunities, growing opportunities, and now is the time to seize them, as opposed to waiting for another 5 years or 10 years down the road, and then the business, all the commerce has changed, and then we complain about it. No, let's not complain. Let's be involved. Let's be engaged in the process. And I think Newark is right at the precipice. Really, when you're talking about the artworks as well, art community, the art is in terms of paintings, in terms of demonstrations and shows and exhibitions. There's so much going on in the city. If you haven't been a participant in it, I suggest you really think about just going around and searching and doing things. We try to keep some of the information in the office so that people can go, but there's lots and lots of stuff going on. And I encourage you to go and participate and learn about what's going on so that we are collectively working together to share the information. And I think that the only other thing that we have to do to really change the way we do it is that we have to share the information. Right, we have to share how we, if there's something going on that you know that we don't, that somebody else doesn't know, you got to bring it to me or somebody else, and then we collectively share that information, and that extends what we do, right? And when we think about Woodson wanted us to share our knowledge, right? So that as we share our knowledge in a kind of a historical context, it's not just about the history of it, it's about the presence of it. What are we doing today? Right? How are we changing our community today? What are we doing? What are our fraternities and sororities doing? What are our other kinds of organizations doing? How do we engage the Masons and the Elks and Eastern Stars? How do we engage them differently so that we collectively can do some things? We tie them in with the academic community and see that those things have a collective way of being transformative for us. So I encourage us all to think about how we can do some other things so that we collectively change what happens in the community, what's going forward in the community. But it only happens if we're willing to do and think differently. If we're willing to think outside the box and do outside the box. You can't just think outside the box, you have to actually do outside the box. And those things collectively are the things that bring about the type of transformation that we need. The transformation we need here at ECC, the transformation we need out in the community. And so I'm not going to say much more. The main thing is really just we're going to raise this flag up and for us collectively to come together and realize that there's things that we can do collectively, and that we must do those things to change the world in which we're in. And I want to encourage you all to participate. There's lots of, not just stuff by the Africana Institute, Student Life and Activities always has great things, bringing people back to Central College for a variety of different programs, but there's also a lot of great things going on in the city, in the library, in the museum, that make sure that, and I encourage faculty to think about letting your students go to some things that are maybe outside of your class, right? Sometimes we have to allow them to go outside the class to experience things that are not within the context of our class, because what happens is that the class, our educational experience is not just the classroom. Some of us, we get so, we want to hold on so much to our educational process, which goes on in our classroom, that we're unwilling to allow students the opportunity to attend programs. When there's programs, there's some great programs that happen here on campus and elsewhere, and I think those are just as important sometimes as what goes on in the classroom. And the one way we can think about that is make that part of our curriculum. Even if it's something that we find out about last moment, how can we have a student who's in math learning something about the Pythagoras theorem? Well, maybe there's somebody here talking about ancient chemistry, and that's where the Pythagoras theorem comes from. So there's other ways of us doing it, and I think when we think outside the box, we have the possibility of our students growing and learning outside the box. I keep saying block. We need to get off the block. I wanted to open up the mic, and Professor Diabo, Professor, if you want to say a couple of words, real quick, we want to provide a little space for folks to do that real quick before we end for the day. You want to say a word or two? But thank you very much. Thank you for coming out, and we're going to open up for a couple more words, and then we're going to call it an afternoon. Yes.
Hi everyone. My name is Dabo. I'm originally from Senegal. I'm a professor of sociology. I'm happy to be here today at the Essex College to celebrate Black History Month. For the one who speak French, my name is Dabo. I'm originally from Senegal. I'm a professeur of sociologie et je suis heureuse d'être là ici aujourd'hui à Essex County College pour célébrer Black History Month. Thank you. And have fun.
Hi, I'm Princess Town. I am an English teacher here, and I often say to my classes that English teachers are sometimes history teachers, but history teachers may not necessarily be English teachers. So there is a lot of history here, there's a lot of history in Newark, a lot going on, and I encourage my students to take part in all of the activities, as many as possible. And I have challenged all of my students to watch the President's inaugural speech, not inaugural, but his State of the Union speech tomorrow night, and we will have a big discussion on the kinds of relationships that we are now faced with in America. And I invite you also to challenge your students to watch the speech tomorrow night. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's always a pleasure to be in front of students and faculty and staff and work with the Africana Institute. I also agree wholeheartedly with Dr. Khalfani that education happens a lot outside of the classroom. So we in student life try to collaborate as much as we can with the Africana Institute and the academic side of the house so that what the students learn inside the classroom is related to how they live outside of the classroom. So this is a very important part of our history here at Essex College, and I salute Dr. Khalfani for doing a wonderful job carrying on that legacy.
All right, doesn't seem like I can get any other takers. But I do want to thank everybody for coming out. It's important that we continue to be involved and engaged in celebrating our history and culture. African History Month has changed, had lots of names over the years, but the point of it is, regardless of the name, we're celebrating our history and culture, and we must continue to do that, and it will continue to evolve into other things as time goes on. And the more we learn about who we are, where we come from, our history, our culture, those things will be added and contributed to the new information that we acquire. All right, thank you all very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.